SITREP World Briefing for July 27, 2026. The United States and Iran held fire again around the Strait of Hormuz, extending a pause after nearly 2 weeks of reciprocal attacks and creating room for diplomatic contacts over the war and the vital shipping lane. U.S. officials said President Donald Trump halted further attacks to make space for talks, while reports from both sides of the standoff pointed to at least a second, and in some accounts a third, consecutive night without new strikes after 13 straight nights of U.S. military action. The strait matters far beyond the Gulf because it is one of the world's most important energy choke points, and any interruption there can quickly affect tanker traffic, insurance costs, and global fuel prices. The lull also fed market expectations that negotiators could revive a ceasefire framework and discuss reopening the Strait of Hormuz to safer commercial navigation. Oil prices fell as traders reacted to the absence of fresh U.S. strikes and to the prospect that diplomacy might reduce the threat to shipping, after the U.S. military had previously said its operations were intended to degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial vessels in the waterway. For Washington, Tehran, Gulf producers, and major importers in Asia and Europe, even a short pause carries immediate economic significance because tanker flows through the narrow passage underpin a large share of seaborne crude exports. The immediate question is whether this operational pause becomes a durable diplomatic channel or only a brief interruption before combat resumes. The latest move follows tit-for-tat military exchanges that had risked derailing any effort to permanently end the war. The United States is trying to use a pause in force to press talks forward, while Iran appears to be matching that restraint for now, giving mediators a narrow opening to test whether reduced violence in and around the strait can translate into a broader settlement. German police shot and killed the suspect in the Berlin Pride attack during an operation in Berlin on Sunday, a day after the deadly assault near the city's Pride celebrations. Police said the man, identified in reports as 21-year-old Abdul Balut, rushed at officers with a knife in a western borough of the German capital, prompting them to open fire. Authorities also said he had a record of Islamist extremist activity, making the killing a major turn in an investigation after a vehicle was allegedly driven into people near the festival area. The police action came after the suspect was accused of driving a minivan into people near Berlin's Pride events on Saturday, in an attack that killed at least one person and injured others. Berlin Pride, one of Europe's most prominent LGBTQ events, draws large crowds to central areas of the city, which is why an attack linked to the celebrations became a national security and public order issue. By Sunday, the investigation had shifted from the aftermath of the ramming to the armed police encounter in western Berlin, where officers moved to detain the suspect and instead faced what they described as an immediate knife threat. The suspect's death means prosecutors and Berlin police must now reconstruct motive, planning, and any extremist links largely through prior records, digital evidence, and witness testimony, rather than a live interrogation. The case lands in a Germany already alert to attacks on public gatherings, and it is likely to sharpen debate over event security, the monitoring of suspected extremists, and protection for LGBTQ communities. A gunman opened fire at a festival in Seattle, Washington, killing 3 people and injuring several others near the Space Needle. Reports said at least 4 other people were injured, and local medical officials said a toddler was among those taken to a nearby medical center on Sunday. Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson said a suspect was in custody after the shooting. The violence erupted at a food festival near the Space Needle, a landmark at the heart of Seattle Center. The presence of children among the wounded, including a 2-year-old boy identified in reports, highlights the potential for casualties across age groups in such environments. The shooting is likely to intensify scrutiny of security planning for open-air gatherings in Seattle and elsewhere in the United States. Police and city officials now face the immediate tasks of identifying the dead, supporting survivors, and determining whether the suspect acted alone. President Emmanuel Macron convened a crisis meeting on July 27th as uncontrolled wildfires in southern France forced more than 250,000 people to leave their homes and prompted authorities to warn tourists to stay away from affected areas. The emergency session came as fires continued to sweep through the country during a severe fire season, with the French government trying to coordinate evacuations, firefighting resources, and public safety messaging across multiple departments in the south. French authorities said the scale of the disaster had already made 2026 an extraordinary wildfire year, with Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau saying fires have scorched 115,000 hectares across France. The crisis has spread beyond the country's traditional Mediterranean fire zones and become a national test for Macron's government, which must manage civil protection, transportation disruptions, and the economic impact on summer tourism during one of the busiest travel periods of the year. The meeting also indicated that the Élysée views the fires as more than a regional emergency. In France, major summer wildfires can quickly become a national political issue because they test the state's centralized crisis response, the readiness of firefighting aircraft and emergency services, and the government's handling of climate-related disasters. Argentina's President Javier Milei triggered a diplomatic rupture with Brazil after calling President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva a convict and a thief at a rally launching the campaign of right-wing candidate Flávio Bolsonaro. Brazil responded by recalling its ambassador to Argentina, turning what began as a campaign stage provocation into a direct state-to-state clash between South America's two largest economies. The episode was notable because Milei delivered the remarks on Brazilian soil at an event tied to the Bolsonaro political family. Lula returned to office after defeating Jair Bolsonaro, and relations with Milei have been uneasy from the outset. By making these remarks at a campaign launch rather than in a bilateral setting, Milei connected diplomatic conflict with Brazil's internal political dynamics. The rupture matters beyond the insult itself, because Brazil and Argentina are central to Mercosur and to the political balance of South America. Diplomatic downgrades between Brasilia and Buenos Aires can complicate trade coordination, regional summits, and cooperation between Lula's administration and Milei's government. Brazil's decision to recall its ambassador indicated that Lula's government treated the comments as an official affront from a neighboring head of state. Student-led protests in New Delhi forced India's education minister to resign after 5 weeks of demonstrations. Protesters celebrated on July 27th after Modi announced reforms to the country's exam system, a move aimed at containing a youth-driven movement that had grown into one of the largest protest waves the capital has seen in recent years. The movement was led in part by the Cockroach Janata Party, founded by 30-year-old Abhijit Dipka, and drew in students from across India who argued that exam administration had become unfair and unaccountable. The resignation created an unusual moment in Indian politics because Modi's administration is typically seen as resistant to street pressure. India's competitive exam system shapes access to universities, public sector jobs, and social mobility for millions of young people. Modi's announcement of exam reforms suggested the administration concluded that procedural changes were necessary to restore confidence among students. Wildfires in Gironde, France, burned through more than 42,000 hectares on July 27th, destroyed at least 240 homes, and pushed closer to Bordeaux, bringing major industrial facilities into the danger zone. French authorities said the advancing fire threatened sites linked to Ariane Group, Dassault, and Thales, 3 companies central to France's aerospace and defense base. The Gironde department has become one of the country's most closely watched fire fronts because it combines dense forest, transport corridors, and high-value industrial infrastructure within the same area. The fire near Bordeaux was described as part of one of the worst wildfire episodes seen in decades in southwest France, with blazes also burning in central Spain around Madrid. The renewed emergency has highlighted how heat, drought, and wind can turn pine forest in Gironde into a fast-moving hazard that reaches residential zones and strategic industrial areas alike. For France, the significance goes beyond property losses, because disruption around Ariane Group, Dassault, or Thales could affect supply chains tied to aviation, missiles, electronics, and broader national defense production. The Gironde fires have also highlighted the climate policy dimension of Europe's summer fire season. Scientists and officials have increasingly linked the growing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events to climate change, and the fires around Bordeaux and Madrid were presented as examples of that pattern in 2026. In practical terms, that means French authorities are confronting not only an immediate firefighting challenge in Gironde, but also a longer-term risk that repeated extreme heat and dry conditions will make evacuations, industrial shutdowns, and large-scale forest losses more common across southern Europe. Sources and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.